I had worked for a dozen years at McKinsey and Company and Becton Dickinson and big companies, and constantly having bigger and bigger roles and more wonderful titles and responsibilities. And then I decided to be part of a startup, and I took a job with a wonderfully exciting high tech company, and poured my heart and soul into that company, and wound up effectively getting fired from that company. He was bullied mercilessly, physically, emotionally, socially, for 2.5 years, from age 6 till 9. He did all kinds of things that one would do if they had returned from the trenches in World War I, and including having a plan to hang himself.
Professor Jack is a loving father, mentor, teacher, and investor, someone who has immense pride in his family. After a dozen years with companies like McKinsey and Becton Dickinson, he spent a decade as a leader for 4 entrepreneurial companies. For the past 10 years, he has been a mentor, advisor, investor for many companies around the world. Mostly, though, he identifies as a teacher. He has taught entrepreneurship for over 20 years at Stanford, the Technical University of Munich, the Haas School at Berkeley, and ESCP. He delights in helping wonderful people achieve great things. His current course, Principled Entrepreneurial Decisions, is now taught around the globe and helps entrepreneurs develop their own set of values and principles that they would bring with them to their lives and careers. Today, we will go on a journey to discover with him chapters of his life that made him truly unstoppable. Hi, my name is Huratul Malika Taj, and I am your host for the podcast, The Unstoppables with Huratul. This podcast brings to you stories of bold and resilient individuals who faced storms in their life, both personal and professional, but did not stop, did not give up. So let us together get on this journey to explore what made them truly unstoppable. So today we have Professor Jack with us. Thank you so much, Jack, for doing this. It's a great honor and privilege to have you on this podcast. And just to give you a brief description of how we met to the audience, I met Professor Jack at Stanford this year at Me to We Fest as I attended his class. The first thing that I recall is that I was actually doing a video shoot because I was also the volunteer for the social media department. And so I think I caught his attention there. But when his introduction came up, the first thought that came to my mind was that this is how professors should be, where Jack brings in so much of experience of the real world through his entrepreneurship and different investments in so many startups. And then correlating it with academics and bringing all that experience in a classroom. It was such a beautiful class, and I just hope that I get to attend many of his classes in the future. So jumping right into the podcast, Jack, my first question to you today is that this podcast is about those chapters of life where you face challenging situations and life before and after that particular event, or probably those challenges, it was not the same. So we would love to hear from you about your life's chapter or chapters and the journey, and how you kind of dealt with those challenges. So over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Huratul. I'm so honored as well to be part of this podcast, and I appreciate what you're doing with it and trying to help reach people in the hopes that they can find maybe a kindred spirits in events and lives of people and what's happened to them. And so I'm here today to be very happy to share some of my experiences. I've definitely appreciated meeting you during our session. As you know, I'm a lecturer Stanford, and I've lectured in entrepreneurship for many, many years, over 20 years. And I mostly consider myself a teacher and a mentor at heart, and that's kind of who I am. I am an investor, and I'm also an advisor to companies. I'm on boards of directors, but I really feel like I'm a teacher. I'm also a father and a husband, and I really appreciate trying to make sure that I have that kind of work-life balance. And now in my life, I do try to really make sure that the things that I do, whether it's personally or professionally, that I do things that I'm truly going to find fulfillment and that I'm going to enjoy. And I think those are a product of the experiences that I've had. And you asked me for some of these most important moments that I've experienced, and the two that come to mind, one is professional and one is personal. The professional one is how in uh, my first startup, I had worked for a dozen years at McKinsey and Company and Becton Dickinson and big companies, and constantly having bigger and bigger roles and more wonderful titles and responsibilities, going through the big company life. And then I decided to be part of a startup, and I came out to Silicon Valley, where my wife is from, and we moved the family. And I took a job with a wonderfully exciting high tech company, and poured my heart and soul into that company, and wound up effectively getting fired from that company, not even laid off, but really fired from it. And I felt it was unfair, and it really affected me deeply. And I'll share more about that with you. And then
Sure.
on the personal side, I also have another um, pretty major life, not necessarily event, but where my son has suffered really badly from originally from bullying and from PTSD and from all kinds of very difficult things. And that's affected me and my family, and obviously him, to a tremendous amount. And that's also caused me to reflect and deal and completely change my outlook on life in many ways. So both of these were pretty seminal events, and I'm be glad to share more with you about either one of them.
Great. So probably we can go to the professional one first, and then your personal, the side of the story where it was a challenging time for you. Could you tell us more about like what happened, in that phase, and when was it? Like which year, if you could recall, um, and what exactly happened that kind of really created that situation that you still remember it, and today you're sharing it with us, and probably the lessons that kind of come with it.
Yeah, so I really do pour myself into everything that I do. And when I after about um, I guess about 12 or so years of working in these bigger companies, when I went to work in a small company, I was the first non-founding officer of the company. I was on the leadership team. I was running many of the functions of the company: business development, sales, marketing, product management. I kind of really felt that I was a big part of that, and I emotionally and spiritually connected to the company deeply. I hired a bunch of wonderful, very, very capable people into the company, whom I mentored, which is my nature, and helped them become really, really good. And this was right in about the year 2000, when I joined the company, right at the beginning of the year 2000. And and everything was going wonderfully, but then the economy started to come down. And as people some people will remember, and some people will have read about, the dot-com crash and the bubble
Oh,
burst on a lot of things. And so at times got a little tougher. Things at the company got tougher, and they got very weird, and everybody started to kind of be pulling in different directions. And the board of directors stepped in and got rid of the CEO and the CFO, and put in a venture capitalist person to run the company. I I remember this all happening and thinking of, I used to think of venture capitalists, my first company, as all of them being these amazing, wonderful people who were omniscient and had a higher view of the world. And, I've come to appreciate since that, most people in every profession are
Yeah.
mediocre. And
Yeah.
some of the people involved here had values and principles that were very different from mine.
Yeah.
Uh, I um, I thought that this new leader was going to come in and make the company much better, and instead, their real job was to basically lay off two-thirds of the people at the company. And I was viewed as a person who, since I had hired most of the people into the company, I would be someone that would know um, maybe who the people were that they should keep. And so I was summoned to the office of the head of the new CEO, because the new CEO never even came to the office. By the way, he just was basically trying to just cut everything. And
Wow.
so I went and I met with him, and we decided who we were going to keep and who we weren't going to keep. And I remember driving home that day thinking, I've never been fired from a company, but um, if we were writing a script, they would sort of get rid of all these people and have me help them do that, and then they would get rid of me. And then I was like, no, they're not going to do that. I was like, well, no, they're not going to do that. And then, sure enough, what happened was they did want me to be part of letting people go and comforting the people, and just being there for the survivors. And then a month or so after that, they got rid of me, and I
Yeah.
was devastated. I was I had I had I mean, now I would have the perspective. There are thousands of startups within a 5 block radius of where I live.
Yeah.
Um, uh, Back then I felt like this was my life, and this was where I had poured all of my life and energy and worked 20 hours a day,
Yeah.
and really cared so deeply about the people and about the company. And here's this venture capitalist who cared nothing about any of those things, who was just firing everybody indiscriminately, had just, again, very different approaches to things than I did. And uh, and I wallowed in self-pity for months. I felt it was so unfair and it was so awful. And just I I had 2 young children. My wife had stopped her work when we moved out to California. And we and I was concerned. I was wondering what the next step was going to be for me. It had never happened to me before, and it really affected me deeply.
Right. And and so post that, how, like, what were the steps you took to kind of come out of this rut and then rebuild, and kind of uh, sort of start again, not kind of wallowing over the same thing. So yeah,
Yeah, I mean, and that as is my style. I'm a very self-reflective person, and I can wind up wallowing in it. And my wife remembers that I was not sleeping through the night. I was waking up in the middle of the night thinking about all the different things that I could do to try to make the situation better and different, and playing out what happened. Um, and it was, I mean, you think about all of the different ways that is. I mean,
yeah,
self-destructive is a strong word, but at least it's not helpful,
right,
right?
yeah,
And uh, and one of the things that happened that I now share with students all the time about this. I used to teach at the Haas School at Berkeley before I taught at Stanford,
okay,
um, and I was teaching with another gentleman who was a CEO of a company, and that gentleman one day, it was, at one point he brought in, one of his friends was an investor, and he brought that investor in to lead the next round of his investment. So his new his new lead investor was a good friend of his. And one day he came in and he said, I just got fired as the CEO of my company that I founded by my
Hmm.
friend who I had brought in to be
Goodness.
uh, the lead investor. And I was ready to uh, spend a bunch of time consoling him and commiserating and talking about my bad experiences and his bad experiences. And he just said, hey, why don't we have breakfast tomorrow and talk about all the things we can now do together moving forward? And we had breakfast, and we hardly even discussed what happened and the company that he had been leading for years, and how this all went down. We only were discussing great opportunities to move forward. I do think it's important to reflect on life and to think about why things happened and how you can maybe use principles to make things better. But this gentleman really showed me how, even in a situation that I could feel was even sillier and more screwed up than mine, he was able to move forward. And so I really felt that as well. And I think that's one of the things that I've really helped try to do effectively during the rest of my career is, my you know uh, the CEO once said, my head and my feet both point in the same direction forward, and so let's move that way. So I think that's been a real part of that. And I'll also say, and then I'll turn it back to you, but also say that one of the things that, you know, it in the end, that company did have some success many years later,
Right.
but it allowed me to do two or three other chapters of my life. And another lesson, I think, is that when something happens in our lives, you don't know until many years later whether that was a good thing or a bad thing. And as bad as
Yes.
some things feel, they can really wind up being good things. As good as some things feel, it can be not so great. Um, and it's really only in the distant future that you can reflect back and say, wow, it really turned out to be a wonderful thing.
Absolutely. Oh my God. Yeah. When you're talking about the dots getting connected, life, comes a full circle. And for you, it has. You've now invested in so many companies. So you're an investor. And so, one of the things that I would like to ask you is that as an investor, um, having the experience of what those investors did, right? And you saw many others on the way. How does it, sort of bring in you the empathy and kind of the outlook that changes with time? And now that you're investing in so many companies, how do you approach a situation when there is a tough situation and you have to talk to the founders or the CEO or the CFO? And how is your approach different because of those situations that happened in the past?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Hoda. I really spend a lot of time helping founders develop an appreciation for their values and principles, and trying to find alignment with their investors' values and principles, either through doing the best job you can to find investors that are aligned with you, or for me as an investor to find founders who are aligned with my values and principles,
Right.
um, or to help help the founders establish a set of principles that the investors at least are aware of and understand as they're coming in, so that when tough times happen, they can go back to those principles
Right.
and hopefully gain agreement from their board and from their investors, because they've pre-sold or they've pre-explained, this is the way I am, this is how I do things, so that those investors are not surprised when those difficult moments happen, when those crucible moments at a company happen, they can all go back to those principles and say, hey, here's what we all said we were going to do. I even had one company that when they had presented their investor presentation to potential investors, one of the first slides was a few of their principles as a company, sort of saying to those investors, hey, here's who we are, here's how we do things. If you're interested in being part of a company that is like this, let's keep talking. That's wonderful. But just letting you know, this is the type of company we are. So the investors come in with an appreciation for that. In terms of empathy specifically, I very much I err on the side of appreciating and understanding how the the founders, the CEO, the company, the organization, the organism that is a company, and how that behaves, and how it's too easy for investors who don't have that background to think of it as just a bunch of numbers and 2/3 of the staff, and okay, and then we only need 1/3 and we have to do this, or or that we can get rid of this person or that person. All of that changes the dynamic in a company, and it's not to say that you don't have to make tough decisions. It's that you do that with an appreciation that an organization is an organism, and that by making changes to that organism, it will affect things, sometimes positively, sometimes negatively, um, and to empower the company to make those decisions within itself. That the one thing that really, in retrospect, had the CEO and I and the other leaders of the company just made decisions, I think we could have done a better job of it than having just somebody parachute in without any operating experience trying to figure out what to do. And I think it's definitely something where I feel more viscerally those kinds of things, and how investors can affect the CEO and a company in ways that are unintended, I think, quite frankly. And that, you know, if anything, I probably still have a little bit of scar tissue, and I probably overthink those things more than underthink them.
Yeah. No, I mean, Jack, the work that you're doing is incredibly important. And I think when I met you, what really was very striking was that you've seen both the sides of the spectrum. You've been into leadership roles, you've seen what it is to be an entrepreneur and have, that pressure from an investor, and then you're investing. So you're also on the investor side of things. And I think where companies actually face challenges is when there is an investor and the leadership roles, people in leadership roles, there's a misfit of values and principles. And I think that's where the work you're doing is so incredibly important. Just one last question on this one, and then we move to the other chapter. Is that to the entrepreneurs and investors, or the new investors who are going to now start their journey for investing into startups, what would be your advice when it comes to the values and principles, matching of those before you actually go and shake hands with an entrepreneur or an entrepreneur with an investor?
Yeah, I think that it's important to appreciate that values and principles exist at multiple levels. You have your own values and principles as a person, personal values and principles. You have values and principles in an organization. A company has values and principles, or your investment firm has values and principles.
Right.
And same things exist in a community level. The industry of venture capital has some values and principles. Startup companies in general have values and principles. Biotech companies have values and principles.
Yeah.
And I have found that in my career and in my life, I'm most at peace when those values and principles align, that when they're congruent. They're never going to be the same. You don't run
Yeah.
your family the same way you would run a company, but they should rhyme. They should have a symmetry in ways that are important to you. And the most important thing is to recognize which are those values that you that would be extremely difficult for you if they weren't congruent within one
Yeah.
company, between the company and yourself, or between the investment firm and the company. Um, for many people, they're different for different people.
Right.
For me, I don't do well with highly political, passive aggressive, hidden agenda type situation. Other
Right.
people don't do well with aggressive, confrontational situations. And I don't do well in promoter people who are overly promotional, people who are always self-aggrandizing and self-promoting. Other people that's considered to be business. Um, and so understanding for you personally, which are those ones that are, if not non-negotiable, you know that they would really chafe at you if you don't have the consistency, and try to avoid those. You'll never have complete alignment all the way through the system. And then try as best you can to share your principles, giving the other person the chance to self-select as to whether those principles fit with them.
Right.
Um, as a real, not a very, as an uncontroversial example, if I'm looking to build a nice, modest-sized company,
Right.
I should let investors know that, because some investors might love that I want to build a nice, modest-sized company with a higher chance of success, but perhaps a less unicorn type outcome,
Right.
where other investors would rather I was shooting for the moon, trying to establish an incredibly huge company, or die trying. And and so what a great example of where you could wind up with a significant mismatch if
Yeah.
both sides don't fully understand what's going on. So share what that is. It allows you to attract the right co-founders, attract the right employees, and attract the right investors for you.
Great. Thank you. I think that, yeah, I think what you're emphasizing on is that rather than looking for just the values that align, it is also important to find and, be sure that what are the places where the values are not aligning also, and kind of to pick those points where you're completely in disagreement with certain principles, and then probably talk about it, or maybe not do it at all if in the future that
Mhm,
might just be a deal breaker. Coming to
mhm.
the second chapter, Jack, we'd love to know about the personal side of the your story, where you narrated in the beginning that you had to face a situation where your son had to go through some troubles. Um, we would love to know that as well.
Yes. So I appreciate that this is maybe a little bit different from the kinds of things that happen to people, but maybe it can be relatable. I um, um, I had this vision of myself as a father, and us as a family of raising. We have two young children who were adorable all over the place, kind of typical kids. Very bright, and both of our children are extremely bright and good athletes, and wonderful kids at their heart, real sensitive kids. And um, we were overjoyed when our son, who who had taught himself to read at the age of 3 and was a incredibly precocious kid, got accepted to a local kind of gifted and talented private school as a first grader at age 6, um, and was the only new boy in the grade in that year, but was the only one who was accepted to join that school, and he did, and we thought that that was an incredible thing and was going to be a defining moment for our family. It certainly was, but it was in the worst way possible, or among the worst ways possible. Um, he was bullied mercilessly, physically, emotionally, socially for 2.5 years, from age 6 till 9, and became a kid who was um, effectively PTSD. He did all kinds of things that one would do if they had returned from the trenches in World War One, and including having a plan to hang himself. He was suicidal um, from the events. Early on, we were such like parents who wanted our kids to be independent that when things were happening to him, we were just trying to empower him to take care of things himself. But it turns out that the school was complicit in this. The bully was from the wealthiest, most feared family at the school. The school was involved in building many new buildings, and this family was donating the most money of anybody to those buildings. And so the school was overlooking the situation. We had no idea how many terrible things were happening to him all the time, to our son all the time. And we kept hoping and thinking the school was going to do something about it, and it made him an absolute mess for his entire life. He's now 27 years old, and um, he went from just being a complete and utter um, uh, nothing for many, many years, and now he's just a little something. But he has no all of his self-esteem is shot. Everything about him is nothing like what he perhaps could have been or should have been. And similar to the first situation, and it happened about the same time frame. Um, I well, certainly wallowed in that for a long time. You don't tend to know what to do about it. You have all kinds of experts who help you through it, and but you do the best you can, and you constantly are defining success downward, and now wrestle with this balance between grief for a child's life that hasn't been lived and a father's life that hasn't been lived. Frustration for how it's affected everybody in the family. His sister, who is deeply affected by it, and my wife and I are deeply affected by it, and of course he is. Um, and still hope that there's some ability to make things better, and try to somehow get through it. And in this case, it's you can probably possibly tell from my demeanor that I'm not exactly through it all. So there's not a real resolution to this one. I think the two things that I've kind of learned to deal with through this, one big one is compartmentalization, is the ability to um, be up in front of the me to we session with you for 90 minutes and plow myself into the wonderful energy of all the people that you got to be part of with that organization, and be in the throes of that, and separate out um, the feelings that I have about perhaps what's the most important thing to me, which is family, and just be able to compartmentalize. And the other is to to to, to strive to focus on uh, truly redefining things, um, uh, and and then hoping off of that new redefinition of things, and focusing more on the hope than on the grief.
I'm really sorry, Jack, that you know you and your family had to go through like this kind of a situation. But when you were talking to me, the first thing that I reflected upon was that from a place where he became suicidal to a place that you brought him to some normalcy. for the parents who will be listening to this podcast, I'm sure that there are kids, and I know a few in even colleges go through ragging and whatnot and bullying. Um, they go through a lot of this trauma, and some of them, even we have heard cases, end up committing suicide. So how did you go about that phase where you brought him back from that? And do you think that family plays a big role in those situations, to for that, those situations to really pass, and for the person to become more resilient or determined to live and cope up with it? And how did you go about it?
Yeah, and I also I don't want to minimize how much of it is all about the about my son as well, right? Is
Yeah.
his some at least, with effectively no self-esteem and no self-worth, even being able to have at least some enough resilience or enough desire to live to be able to figure out how to cope with the feelings that he had, ways that he would things that he would think about to avoid acting on his plan, uh, ways that he changed his approach to life in order um, to shield himself from those things, some of which are counterproductive in the long run, but enabled him to get through stuff in the short run. I think the most important thing that we've done is just over time learned more and more what's possible and what's not possible, learned more and more um, uh, to expect the unexpected at times and be able to deal with that, not as someone who is just being um, uh, antisocial uh, or self-destructive on purpose or destructive on purpose, but it's someone who's just developed these tendencies and these approaches, and just being able to just be there for him, while also doing whatever you can to help him help himself. And I
Right.
think that the there are analogies to alcoholism and drug use and other an addictive behavior here, where the person becomes his own worst enemy. The things that they learn to do to cope are the things that are also making it harder for them to get out of their situation. And they keep hitting lower and lower and lower
Yeah.
bottoms. And it's in this conversation, I think I'm starting to realize to some extent and maybe it's wishful thinking, but I think he has stopped hitting lower and lower and lower bottoms. It's still not a linear path upward, but I think that he's no longer that things are not getting worse, that he's bounced off of the absolute lowest bottom. And uh, as much as I'd like to feel, yes, family is absolutely hugely important. It's the only safe haven he had for many years in his life.
Yeah.
And but while I think that so providing that haven was important, it's mostly his ability to view us as that haven that I think has been the thing that's gotten him through it. And I would say, this is I haven't really thought of it this way before this discussion. So I appreciate very much the ability to share this with you.
No, thank you, Jack. I can only understand what you and your family must have gone through. I have a very close family friend they've gone through something similar, and it just I know how it impacts the entire family, and of course, the person who's going through that situation, it's unimaginable what they go through each day. Sometimes they will share, sometimes they will not even be able to share what goes on in their, in themselves, right? So yeah, I am really like short of words here. um So Jack,
Well, I do appreciate that. I mean, and for those people who have gone through much worse than we have,
yeah,
I do appreciate that, and I appreciate that we still have our son, and
yes,
that in
yeah,
many situations he either would have acted on the uh, on his impulses, uh, and he's never, to his credit, he's never done drugs or alcohol. And
mm-hmm.
he kind of understood at a young age that if he did, it might become something that would be a very bad um, coping mechanism. But many people would have um, died from those things.
Yes,
And we know many people who have lost their children, and there's nothing at all worse than that, or children that are in even worse shape than our son. So it's I feel for those people, and when you think about lessons learned and how you approach situations, for me, on the one hand, um, it does make me feel uh, a sense of grief and sadness whenever I think about how the life that he has not had, and that he's not had an ability to grow up as a child and now as a young adult. Um, but I also, multiple times a day, I find myself um, uh, highlighting for other people who do have uh, wonderful families and wonderful children, how much they should appreciate that, not in a dogmatic way, but just when I hear something that someone is doing that is just a typical, normal, wonderful thing that a parent and a child do or a family does, I go out of my way to just um, let them know how wonderful that is, and
yeah,
that they should feel fantastic, and how happy I feel for them that they're having those moments and those things, whether it's the whole family doing yoga together, or um, going to a child's game, or um, uh,
yes.
just those moments. And I think it allows me to empathize with that very much.
Yeah, and but Jack, while you were talking about this, something that just came to my mind right now is that you talked about something so important, that he's not at his rock bottom that he was, and it comes and it goes, and it's kind of wavy, but it's still like not the rock bottom, and that gives us hope that who knows tomorrow what happened will turn around his life to a place where he would probably build something and for this cause, and maybe you'll be superbly proud of him, and who knows what happens tomorrow. You have still seen him till 27. There's like a whole life left there, and he's still, like, I think is, sometimes it just takes that moment where you realize that this is what I've gone through, and I'm not going to let anybody else go through it, and who knows what he will do in future. So we always live on hope, and I really hope that he gets that strength, and one day he will not just rise up for himself, but even become the strength and power and fire beneath the wings of all those who probably have gone through similar situations. So really, like,
Thank you.
I really hope
Thank you for
that.
that. Thank you for that. And he does have that kernel in him, and
Yes.
he does feel that way.
Yeah, and trust me, Jack, sometimes it takes really the lowest of the lowest to kind of rise to that place where you. I'm not saying that somebody should go through it. The other day, like when we spoke, I talked to you about Grisha, and I had him on the podcast where his son got hit on the street of
Hmm.
Brussels, and nobody
Right, right.
nobody wants to see his son 100% paralyzed. It's the worst of the nightmares that could happen, but now he's preparing for the Paralympics,
Yeah.
and it is something that he found within him, that he really wants to. So things that happen, and I don't know, I really hope that you will be the proudest father ever, for him.
Thank you.
Really.
Thank you, Herta.
The last thing that the last segment, in fact, there are two questions in it. One, we would love to know your new work, anything that you're doing at this point, which is coming up. And also one message to all the viewers. You can choose the order, the listeners and the viewers. Yeah.
So the in terms of my work, I most of what I'm devoted to now is teaching this principles work that I borrowed from Ray Dalio's book Principles and adapted to how people might think about entrepreneurial pursuits, but it also touches on people's personal pursuits. And I try to help people develop their own set of values and principles that work for them, that they would bring to their lives and their careers.
Right.
And I've been teaching that at Stanford and at TUM, the Technical University of Munich, and at ESCP in Paris and Berlin, and a little bit at INSEAD. And I've been doing that now for about 7 years.
Oh.
And I've more recently been taking that and helping organizations, helping companies, not so much develop their values and principles, but most often codify them. They already exist, especially principles, which is what I'm focused on. Those things that really help drive decisions and drive behavioral norms in companies, and helping folks catalog them, enumerate them, help them come to the surface, and then help them indoctrinate new employees by helping them understand what those are, developing stories, anecdotes that make those principles come alive, that help people understand how organizations behave, and instilling those in as many people and as many companies as possible. And some people leverage by blasting things out to 200 million Twitter followers. I hope that I've leveraged what I'm doing through touching the lives of these people and people like you, who then help spread that on to other folks. And I think that if people were to be more in touch with their principles, they would make better decisions for themselves and their lives, and companies would make better decisions for themselves by making decisions, by wrestling with conflicting principles within the context of a situation and making a principle-based decision, and then learning from those decisions that they make. They will get better and better at making those kinds of decisions.
Right. And like one message you would want to give to the
I
listeners?
think that's the message as well.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Jack. This is such an enriching podcast, and I'm sure that a lot of people across the globe who are going to listen and tune in would be able to relate, because there are a lot of entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs, investors, and then there are a lot of people who are going through personal challenges as well. And thank you for sharing such an especially the personal side of your life. I have no words to express how much you've gone through. So it's emotionally, I'm sure, draining when even you go through those specific moments and recall them, and when you were sharing with us. So thank you so much for doing that. Thanks a lot for being on the podcast.
Thank you, Herta.